or even on any 2 or 3 property owners. They had to consider the impact on the property rights of all relevant persons, all relevant entities in GMA 12, and they did so, and they did their very best to balance those private property rights against one another. And they considered impacts on existing permits and users of the DFCs, as well as projected future demand. And despite what was suggested this morning, the DFCs, as determined, do permit future growth, as Mr. Seifert will explain. And the board will consider whether the DFCs provide for the reasonable and prudent development of the state's groundwater resources. I'm not going to do something that I swore never to do, but to ensure that I get it right, I'm going to read from this bullet point. The DFC metric permits ready and reliable measurement, contrary to what was suggested this morning. Average drawdown. Drawdown is something that can be reliably measured, and the districts are prepared to do so now. And I'll depart from the PowerPoint for a moment. Ready and reliable measured is a critical component of prudent development. The first condition is that you must have reliable information. This DFC allows the collection and use of reliable information to assist in assessing aquifer conditions and any needed correction or change to meet the district's statutory obligations under Section 35.001 of the Water Code. Conservation, preservation, protection, recharging, and prevention of waste of groundwater. And again, to the extent it's relevant to this bullet point, as Mr. Seifert will explain, these DFCs do permit growth in the development of groundwater. Mr. Seifert is going to speak at much greater length about the science that went into this. In fact, I'm not going to speak about science at all. To do so would be immediate malpractice. But I will tell you that the districts were careful to attend to their obligations to use sound science, contrary to what you may have heard this morning. The districts hired respected geologists from around the state, including from LBG-Guyton, Mr. Seifert's firm, Daniel B. Stevens, Intera, Keir Consulting, and Martin Geologic. These consultants assisted throughout the process in helping to determine the DFC. And the process was iterative. By that I mean there was a lot of back and forth between the Water Development Board and the GMA, using the regional GAN provided by the board to refine the pumping files and develop the DFCs. Or at least help develop the DFCs. And there are a handful of other considerations that go into the Water Development Board's review of the DFC. And there's some other information that may not fit neatly into one or the other of the qualifications that you're supposed to walk through. These districts, I don't know how the process worked in other districts. I only know this GMA. These districts together greatly embraced the joint planning process. They did what they were supposed to do. They worked together. They worked hard. They spent a great deal of money and time and did a great deal of research to try to get this process and these DFCs right. And they did so. And in doing so, they used sound science with respected consultants and in continuous consultation with the Water Development Board staff. Again, these DFCs are reasonable. These are reasonable DFCs that are the product of a reasonable process. The districts met all of their legal criteria, complied with all relevant statutes and regulations. I've heard nothing to the contrary today. And they sought to balance their statutory considerations and the varying interests of numerous different stakeholders. And again, as Mr. Seifert will explain in a few minutes, these DFCs provide for a significant increase in groundwater production over the 50-year planning horizon in order to meet regional demands. Now, the bottom line from our point of view, the process was open and inclusive. If you read the affidavit of Michael Neese, who's a former board member of Lost Pines, if you read the affidavit of Gary Westbrook, you can come, and of Joe Cooper for that matter, you can come to no other conclusion but that the process was open and inclusive, and that the DFCs are reasonable under all of the factors that the Water Development Board is supposed to consider. The DFCs are quantified, physically possible, and based on sound science, and that they appropriately balance the many interests that the districts are bound to consider. Now, before I close and get out of Mr. Seifert's way, there are a couple of things that I wanted to mention that go particularly to some of the things that L.L.P. said, that the petitioner said this morning. One of the things that the petitioner said this morning is that no stakeholder input was received, and that could not be further from the truth. In particular, the districts received input from L.L.P. itself. Joe Cooper's affidavit, which again is Exhibit C in your notebooks, in paragraph 5 details a May 26, 2010 public hearing. This is some number of months before the actual promulgation of the DFCs. And Joe Cooper himself asked L.L.P. if these are the wrong numbers, what are the right numbers? What data would you like considered? What should the drawdown be? And L.L.P.'s response was nothing. L.L.P.'s response was, we disagree with the model. That's at paragraph 5 of Joe Cooper's affidavit. Paragraph 10 of Joe Cooper's affidavit contains an excerpt of one of the exhibits to Mr. Cooper's affidavit. The exhibit is a response to comments. And the response to comments was provided after the October 30th, 2008 joint meeting of the GMA. It's Exhibit 3 to Mr. Cooper's affidavit. And as paragraph 10 and the excerpted portions from that exhibit detail, it actually says they did consider the preferred method of the petition, which is to base the DFCs on total water and storage in the aquifers. And it explains why that methodology was not used. And by implication, why the methodology that was used, average drawdown, was used instead. So I encourage you to please have a look at paragraph 10 of Mr. Cooper's affidavit, as well as the attachments. And again, I'd just like to thank everybody else for being here, but thank you for listening attentively, for reading the materials that we've provided to you, and for helping us sort this out. Thank you.
Mr. Reynolds, other members of the Texas Water Development Board staff, representatives from L.L.P. and audience, we're happy to be here today to continue this presentation in this hearing. Okay, can everybody hear me all right? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. My name is John Seifert. I'm with the firm of LBG-Guyton Associates. We have been serving since 2000 as a groundwater hydrologist for the Brazos Valley Groundwater Conservation District. I have bachelor's and master's degree in agricultural engineering from Texas A&M, and have been practicing in the area of groundwater hydrology since then, and was when Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford were vying for the White House. It's been a while. There are others who are working in this effort. There's James Beach with our firm, who is here today. With the firm of Interra, which has been mentioned previously, there is Steve Young, who worked on this effort. For the firm of Martin Geologic, there is Matt Uliani. With the firm of D.B. Stevens, there's Stefan Schuster and Andy Donnelly. And then also the firm of Kier Consultants was involved. And we, individually and combined, have substantial experience working with groundwater issues within the GMA 12 area. The topics to discuss. Let's look at water resources planning as an effort. This was an open process with stakeholder involvement within GMA 12. Water use demand projections were developed by the Texas Water Development Board. They were supplemented with demand projections from specific districts, GCDs, knowing the circumstance and the condition within those districts, This process used the Texas Water Development Board's central Queen City Sparta GAM, which includes layers for the Corrizo, the Simsboro, the Hooper, the Calvert Bluff. We will discuss the DFC methodology, and we will discuss the DFC, development of the DFCs for GMA 12. For the purpose of a petition, excuse me, the petition process is not intended for the appeal of issues related to the modeling process or modeling assumptions. The petition process is limited to addressing the reasonableness of the adopted desired future conditions on the merits of the DFC itself. And this is something from the GM-8-9 petition proceedings in January of this year. The GMA-12 area. It encompasses land from the Trinity River on the east to and past the Colorado River in the southwest, extending to the western boundary of Bastrop County. It encompasses 14 counties, with 12 counties being the main counties where the Wilcox, Corrizo aquifers are reasonably significant. Falls and Navarro counties have a very small part of those counties where the aquifers exist, but they're still within the GMA. You know, the principal aquifers are the Corrizo-Wilcox group. The shallowest is the Corrizo, then below it's the Calvert Bluff, the Simsboro, prolific water producer within this sequence. The Hooper is at the bottom of this sequence. Then younger formations include the Queen City, the Sparta, and the Yawa-Jackson. The Corrizo also is a prolific water-producing aquifer in the state and in parts of GMA 12. Here's a map depicting the area which we were discussing previously. Freestone, Leon, Madison counties to the east, Bastrop and part of Fayette County. To the west or to the southwest, you can see part of Fayette County is actually in part of GMA 14 too, because it has different aquifers other than the Corrizo-Wilcox that provide water in that county. Groundwater resources planning effort. This was performed as required by House Bill 1763, passed in 2005. We utilized available groundwater planning data from Region C, G, H, K for the 2006 plans, and also from the 2007 State Water Plan. As stated previously, it was supplemented by detailed information from the various groundwater conservation districts. The effort started in the latter part of 2005, and DFCs were submitted to the Texas Water Development Board in August 2010. This is a water resources planning effort with DFCs to be updated at least once every 5 years. This was the initial response. This was the initial response to House Bill 1763, and in the legislation there will be other responses based on that legislation in upcoming years.